Hello, everyone. Cooperman257 here, and it's been a very long time since I've used my YouTube channel. Arguably, when it was used to be discussing Doctor Who and Marvel movies, where I'd invite, of course, the great Captain Swiss. I'm normally on his channel, but he's been a bit absent lately, and I figured it'd be why not try to do a political discussion on something that he would normally do, but he's probably a bit too busy right now. So I've asked a bunch of friends in the bullet chat, and luckily Tom here has been willing to discuss it.
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss it.
Yeah.
No issues.
Yeah. Now, for those who have not been paying attention from the last weekend, or at least I assume that everyone has, to some extent in the UK, has probably somewhat paid somewhat of attention, is that Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, has been talking about trying to join Parliament again with the upcoming by-election for Gorton and Denton, as I believe the previous MP. I'm trying to remember his name. What was it?
I think it was Andrew Gwynn. I remember his name was Gwynn, but not sure about the first name.
Yes, Andrew Gwynn. This guy here who was, I think, once a part of Jeremy Corbyn's cabinet, and I think once part of the Socialist Campaign Group, but I think did they kick him out or something?
He was suspended. The whole reason he resigned is twofold. The first reason is that he resigned over offensive messages that he had sent in a WhatsApp group towards a particular constituent, as well as just offensive messages in general. And the second reason he resigned, and this was the real reason for him going, was essentially health issues. He had been struggling with health issues that he didn't disclose, as far as I know. But that was ultimately the reason he wanted to leave. The Labour Party made it clear they weren't going to accept it back in. He had health issues, and he ultimately saw no point in continuing as an independent member of Parliament, and has resigned as a result.
So basically, he got in a bunch of scandals and decided not to do a Corbyn.
Yeah, pretty much. Because he wouldn't have won anyway, even if he had done that.
Yeah. He's not had the years of being locally popular as Corbyn was, but yeah.
And also because of the fact that he was caught up in a scandal directly attacking one of his constituents in the WhatsApp group, that wouldn't have helped his image either in an election.
Yeah, you never insult your electorate. Regardless of how they are. But anyway, so since it's a part of Greater Manchester, many MPs and news journalists and all that have been suspecting or even supporting Burnham to take the seat, to try and replace him in the seat for the by-election, so he could eventually, long-term, become the new leader of Labour, since Keir Starmer has become the most unpopular politician in our lifetimes, at least UK-wise. And many people are starting to debate whether or not it would be better if he was gone. But of course, Keir Starmer and his lot, do not want that to happen. So,
the basic context behind this is that since at least the local elections of 2025, where Labour performed far worse than even their harshest critics thought they would, there have been constant discussions about Keir Starmer's future as both Labour leader and Prime Minister. Basically, Labour's time in office ever since they got in July of 2024 has been more or less the definition of Murphy's Law. Everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong, and it's been reflected in their polling. Ever since they got back in, it's been a complete linear decline for the party. They've lost half of their vote share since the last election, and their vote share already wasn't good.
it was worse than Corbyn's 2019 vote share, and that was regarded as like the worst result since 1935 to many people.
Yes, Starmer got 500,000 less votes than Corbyn did in 2019. So already Labour was starting from an incredibly weak position, but that's only got weaker now. Within 2 years, well, not even 2 years, a year and a half in government, Labour has gone from polling first in the opinion polls on average to now polling third in the opinion polls on average behind the Tories and Reform.
And in some
And
cases, the Greens.
yeah, and in some cases, even the Greens. Some polls have put them as low as 14%. So the situation is incredibly bad for the party. And in a couple months' time, there'll be local elections, which will, in a lot of ways, be a mini general election, because you've got Wales, you've got Scotland, and then you've got London borough councils, and then other councils in metro areas throughout the country. And all signs point to a real catastrophe for Labour in those locals.
Oh yeah,
Poll,
go on. Sorry.
Polling shows that they're polling third in Scotland on average behind Reform and the SNP, which is an incredible failure considering that there were talks shortly after the general election that Labour would potentially regain their position as the largest party in the Scottish Parliament. That's not going to happen now. And in Wales, the situation is even bleaker than it is in Scotland. They're polling fourth in averages now, and they're within margin of error in certain polls of coming sixth in Wales. So, and they will lose at the minimum hundreds of councillors in London, well, not just London, but the country as a whole, and total losses are anywhere between 600 to 800 councillors. So the situation for Labour is as bleak as it can possibly be.
Yeah.
And many at the top and within the party itself are basically saying that the reason this has all happened is because the leadership have screwed up badly. They're not improving. Things are only getting worse. And it's hard to see how things are going to get any better over the next 3 years. And so there is discussions about a change in leadership to potentially save the party from total wipeout come the next GE.
Oh yes, this is basically the UK version of the midterms, if you will, for the US. But that's another stream. But yeah, it's it's bad when arguably you could have said, okay, Scotland, the SNP, dominant Scottish nationalism, but it doesn't help the fact that usually, from my understanding, Labour usually comes second in the Scottish Parliament elections at the very least. Maybe
Yeah,
like
so
that. Sorry,
yeah,
guys.
they're solid second in the Scottish Parliament elections. They've never not been second since the SNP domination that began from 2007 onwards. So them being third is a really, really bad failure. But the Wales one, I think, is even worse
Oh yeah,
because
because go on.
Because with Wales, Labour has essentially ruled Wales uninterrupted since the end of the First World War. So the fact that they're coming within margin of error in certain polls, coming sixth place, is a generational fumble. Like
Uh,
it's just a disaster in every possible meaning of that word.
oh yeah, because it's like on one hand, let's see, Labour becoming third to a new party and Reform up in Scotland. Oh, that's bad, but Wales is definitely the crowning thing of like, let's see, you're screwed because well, basically, if anyone that knows, Wales is actually the heartland, the original heartland for Labour. It's where Labour got their first MPs and that stuff. And like Tom has said here, it's been let's see, the Welsh Labour has been dominant for 100 years. If it not for like the wider UK elections and all that stuff, you would probably, most people would say Welsh Labour was the most arguably successful Democratic Party in history, since, well, they would always end up winning in Wales regardless of what happened. And there have been quite a few elections that people would say were catastrophes for like Labour over the years before arguably this year's Senedd elections. That's likely results to happen, because there was, of course, the infamous 1931 election, which Labour was reduced to 50 MPs. Let's see, Wales was still, most of those MPs were still there around there, well, of course, Welsh ones. The infamous 1983, in which, due to the Gang of Four splitting, let's see, against Michael Foot, that, let's see, caused Labour their worst, at the time, worst result. And then even, of course, let's see, 2019, in which, let's see, Corbyn got, let's see, his bad result. Let's see, though, arguably with the way things are polling, that might no longer be the case. But yeah, Wales has definitely, regardless of what has happened to Labour, has always stuck with it. But now, Keir Starmer has done what none of the other leaders have done for Labour in the past, be it Ramsay MacDonald, let's see, Michael Foot, or Jeremy Corbyn. And it's like, get Wales to turn against Labour, which, let's see, if you said that like even a decade ago, that would have been like unheard of, really. But
the way it would be contextualized, if you were to compare it to UK or US context, is it would be the equivalent of Sinn Féin losing West Belfast, and the equivalent of the SNP losing like Dundee or Aberdeen, that are like really pro-independence. Or it's the equivalent of the Tories completely losing the home counties and Hampshire. And in the US, it's the equivalent of the Democrats losing California and New York, and the Republicans losing Oklahoma, and Texas. It's like the logic behind it all is, if you can't win in your heartland, what chance do you have in the swing areas?
yeah, and that is true. And let's see, arguably, it'd be losing the Heartland would be the best. Let's see, the original Heartland would be the best cause to saying, we have no confidence in you as leader. You got to go.
Yes, and that's where Andy Burnham comes into the picture,
Yeah.
as to why people are sort of rallying behind him. Well, I should say, before we explain that, we should explain how the whole Burnham situation came to be in the first place.
Uh-huh.
It started as soon as Andrew Gwynn resigned. There was huge speculation that Burnham would run to be the candidate for the seat, and he was given the deadline of 5 p.m. on Saturday to put his paperwork in to be a candidate, which he did on the dot. And then the following day, on Sunday, there was speculation about whether the NEC would allow him to go through or not. And ultimately, in the end, they didn't. They vetoed his candidacy in a 8-1 vote, um, to block him, with Lucy Powell being the only one to vote against that.
Yeah. Which, for the context, let's see, Lucy Powell is the current deputy leader of Labour, though not the deputy prime minister, because that was Angela Rayner, but she got, let's see, scandals, and then David Lammy replaced her. And let's see, the member, and then there's a deputy leadership to replace her, and Lucy Powell was arguably elected as the soft left candidate, or at least the anti, let's see, Keir Starmer candidate, as most people saw it, as the other candidate was, let's see, regarded as Keir Starmer's favourite. Now, granted, she hasn't really caused any problems for Starmer, but arguably she is a part of like the Burnham faction. But let's see, all these other NEC members who have been elected are clearly in the pro Keir Starmer lot, right?
Yeah, basically, the faction that she's a part of is called Mainstream, which is widely seen as basically Andy Burnham's faction within the Labour Party. That's what Lucy Powell is. And Lucy Powell is basically part of a clique of MPs that are all from the Greater Manchester area who basically want Burnham to get into Parliament again and then be leader of Labour and basically rescue the party from its terminal decline. And the current factional debate is between that faction and basically the Starmer faction, who want to preserve Starmer's power at any cost.
Yeah.
And that's what the current debate is. After Burnham was blocked, there was a massive uproar amongst Labour MPs, mainly located in the north of England, who said that it was outrageous, that it was anti democratic, that the constituent Labour Party within Gorton should be given the right to vote on who they want to represent them, not the NEC in London, is
Oh
what the
yeah.
argument was.
It's
Burnham,
ironic. Sorry, go on.
Burnham himself came out and gave a statement after he was blocked,
Oh
in which
yeah,
he basically said that,
he was disappointed, right?
yeah, he said that he was disappointed in the decision, and that he would continue to represent the people of Greater Manchester as mayor. And then he left a couple of follow-up tweets that were quite interesting. The second one was quite a bitter tweet in which he said along the lines of, "You would think after 30 years of service that that would mean something." Um, and then the journalist basically wrote something along the lines of, "Oh, he needed to be blocked because it would have caused a psychodrama that would have damaged Labour's credibility." And Burnham responded to that by saying, "Well, I don't think losing the seat is going to help Labour's credibility at all, really."
Oh yeah,
Um,
you've got like Starmer coming out to defend it. Many of the journalists or MPs on his side are talking about how it would cost too much to do a mayor by-election and all that stuff, or he should just focus on being the mayor of Manchester, all that stuff. But everyone knows deep down that the reason why Starmer has and the NEC has basically blocked him is because they know the moment Burnham gets in, the soft left or slash left has their candidate to like guaranteed to replace Starmer or arguably beat West Streeting. Because that is basically the reason why many people have chosen it. And everyone knows that. The journalists may go on and on about that, but everyone deep down knows that Starmer is basically cooked. The only question is, who does like the soft left or Labour in general replace him with? That is basically what's going on here.
yeah, it's essentially massive factional infighting where Starmer's kind of done the unique thing where instead of doing putting the party before the country, which is a criticism that you heard a lot during the Tory years, Starmer's taken it a step further, where he's put his faction, above the party and above the country as well.
Which is a bit ironic because I bet you he probably thought that Corbyn did the very same thing that he's doing now.
Maybe not himself, but his faction definitely said that kind of thing back in the day when Corbyn was in charge. I mean, I remember back in the old days when Tom Watson, who was a notorious saboteur for Corbyn's leadership, was having his job threatened by having the deputy leadership position be completely removed. And I remember when that was going on, and people said that it was Darwinism and it was Corbyn being an autocrat and a dictator and all this kind of stuff. And yet Starmer has deliberately blocked a rival from being allowed into Parliament, and you don't hear that criticism at all.
Yeah, which ironically, of course, Corbyn never did that, and many in the left would wish that he would. In fact, some wish he would be a bit more Stalin-like when he was like taking command, just because. Let's see, just because. Well, they know that the left knew that the Blairites, basically, Starmer's faction, would just did nothing but undermine, and Tom Watson was one of the biggest ones. In fact, I believe you once told me, Tom, that Tom Watson sort of undermined every leader that he was ever a part of, but yeah, but that didn't happen. And now, of course, let's see. Ironically, let's see, the deputy leader vote thing worked against the now Ritzy Starmer's faction since they didn't get their candidate, but at the very least, they seem to be wanting to make sure they at least prevent Burnham. So, arguably, Starmer's basically showing himself to be more and more of a hypocrite. And while this is going on, I should probably mention that Apollo TD has put a comment saying, well, Starmer's media are backing him, which arguably is no surprise. Though granted, I doubt it's helped him at all.
No, it hasn't. If polling came out from Greater Manchester that showed that the majority of people that live in Greater Manchester were opposed to the decision that was made in by Starmer about Burnham. Polling also was done on Westminster voting intentions, which showed that at the current polling, about 36% of people in Greater Manchester would vote Reform compared to 28% who would vote Labour now. But if Burnham was made leader, that number would jump to 49% of people would vote for Labour in Greater Manchester. So
no surprise, because regardless of what our friend James Fielding might say, most think Andy Burnham has done a good job as mayor of Manchester. And I think even though some might be disappointed that they won't have him as mayor anymore, I think many people in the country, at least at this time being, think I'd rather have Andy Burnham as PM than Keir Starmer.
Well, he's the only politician, Labour politician, that doesn't have a negative disapproval rating, which should tell you a lot, to be honest. Another thing that was noteworthy about that poll as well is that it showed that 33% of people who were Labour voters in Greater Manchester would now vote Reform as a result of Andy Burnham being blocked by the Labour NEC. So
while Starmer may have saved himself in the short term, long term, he's further screwed himself and his party by doing this. In fact, I've actually seen some journalists wishing that, let's see, you know what, if Starmer, did this in a symbol of more strength, kind of like how Blair Brown it is, they'd say, let Burnham run, and either A, if it works in their favour, if he ends up losing the by-election, he can't stand and then looks a bit weak, and then also costs them the great mayor. That takes out one rival, but arguably you could have maybe invited him to the cabinet and make him have a job just to put pressure on him and show whether or not he'd actually be good or not at that thing. But that is one thing I have seen some journalists say. But arguably, Starmer, of course, has blocked this, and arguably it's clear that he's clearly afraid of Burnham, and everyone knows it.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's abundantly clear that Labour is going to lose Gorton and Denton to an opposition party. There is very little chance. I think there's
a tweet that came out recently from the Politics UK that Farage was actually afraid, sort of relieved that Burnham's not running, because he pretty much knew that Burnham would probably have won it, even if they sit as best candidate. And Reform were talking about how if Burnham ever got in a by-election, they would try and shove everything they could to try and prevent him from winning, because they know that Burnham is the biggest threat. Now, it could be debated whether or not Burnham could actually win an election, given the current state that Labour is in right now. But at the very least, it would be much more of a harder threat for Reform, and might even prevent them a majority. And who knows, for we know, if he got lucky. From what I understand, Sak Polanski, the Green leader, is probably willing to work with any Labour leader that isn't Starmer at the very least, though maybe not West Streeting as well. It's possible that Burnham does well enough that Labour gets enough seats and may only need backing of, say, Lib Dems or Greens in order to keep in, but that is a what-if discussion. We've got a bit of a comment here before you make comments respond to me, Tom. I'm just going to put out. Burnham has managed to secure plans for an underground Manchester train station from Starmer and Reeves. He's a god here. Only negative people say he's putting up mayor tax. So arguably, as Apollo PD has just shown, Burnham is extremely popular. Has managed to do something like secure plans for underground train station, which I think a lot of people usually support more nationalisation and trains, working in the cities and wider areas. So go ahead, Tom.
Well, I mean, in 2021, when the mayor of Manchester was up for election, Burnham managed to win every single ward in Greater Manchester in his mayoralty. And the second time the mayoralty was up for election, which I think was in either 2024 or 2025, I think it was 2024.
Yeah.
He once again won all but two wards in Greater Manchester. So yeah, Burnham is extremely popular, which again just gives further proof that Starmer and his faction were more interested in preserving their own power than doing good for the party or the country itself. So, in terms of who will likely win in Manchester Gorton now, not Manchester Gorton, that's the old seat name, Gorton and Denton now, um, I would say it's a two-horse race between Reform and the Green Party. And
Yeah.
if I
Mhm.
had to guess who out of the two would win that, I would say it would be the Green Party who would probably win out of the
Ah,
two.
so not reform then. Interesting.
No, the reason I think they will win is because I think that Labour voters in Gorton and Denton, much like what happened in Caerphilly with Plaid Cymru, will be
Oh,
willing to tactically vote for the Greens because the Greens will be favourable to a progressive option to defeat reform. Also, the makeup of that seat is also very favourable to the Green Party as well.
oh yeah.
So I think that for me, reform's only path to victory in Gorton and Denton would be them massively winning over the Denton area and then a couple of places in Gorton, and then they win that way. Or the left wing and progressive vote is massively split that they can't win um, due to how bad the vote is split. And so reform comes through the middle, basically. But
Oh yeah.
my opinion is, at the moment, based on gut instinct and what I know about that seat, the Greens are the favourites to win it, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so now some people talk about George Galloway running, but I'm pretty certain that he's probably been barred for running any election since he's currently, I think, under arrest or under investigation or something.
He claims he is, but in reality, he isn't. It's just the usual grifting that he does.
Yeah.
He said that if Burnham was the candidate, Labour candidate for Gorton, he would run against him. But because Burnham is not going to be the candidate, he's not running now. And instead, he's given it over to some councillor for the Workers' Party who will be their candidate in that seat.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, there's been a bit of talk about who the Greens to select. Some thought Zach Belansky, but I think he's rather continuing to work as like the leader outside of Parliament and gaining momentum. I have some say the deputy leader might run, but who knows? But if the Greens do win it, then hypothetically, this more or less will further, like, I think, secure Sax Palancy's position within the Green leadership because he's arguably their first solo leader, which arguably your party should have just stuck with that. But oh well, that's their fault. But yeah. But let's see, Zach Volansky has, of course, changed the course of the Greens. They've become a lot more aggressive, much more open with what they do. He's got a lot of media attention, and arguably, you need to get some results. Now, arguably, it's worked out for him as a lot of membership and polling has rise, but winning this by-election would, of course, confirm that there is momentum behind Zach Polanski. And whether or not you think he can actually win a general election, but at the very least, he's arguably could make Greens actually proper fighting force in Parliament at the very least. And arguably, this might keep him around longer term because, Greens usually actually have elections every 2 years to replace their leader or co-leaders now. So that's arguably what's probably going to happen with the Green Party if they do win this seat.
Yeah, the Greens have had three candidates to pick from what I've seen. The first one was, as you mentioned, Zach Polanski. The reasons why they would have gone for him are pretty obvious, but he ultimately turned it down because he basically said, in addition to him wanting to focus more on building up the Green Party and having that be his main focus rather than focusing on that and parliamentary work, he also said that because he's not from Manchester and has never lived in Manchester, that he felt it would be unfair to be parachuted into there just to basically increase the chances of winning. He wanted it to be somebody else to do it. So
Yeah.
he ruled himself out.
Yeah. So basically
Um,
standing up to his principles, basically.
yeah, so he ruled himself out. The second person is the deputy leader of the Greens. They've been floated as a candidate. And another person who was also floated as well was a local Manchester activist. Um, they've been floated as a candidate as well. It's a woman whose name I don't remember, but she's one of the candidates they've picked.
Yeah.
I ultimately don't know who they'll go with, but they are, in my opinion, the favourites to win
Yeah.
Gorton at the
Yeah.
moment.
I mean, Barto DD, fun enough, comments about how the rumour is Polanski is trying to impose deputy leader Montfort Ali on the local Greens, and the local members aren't happy. Though, if I had to personally guess, I'd probably say they're likely to pick the Manchester one just because I think they want, like, Zach Polanski says, like, oh, I'm not standing because I'm not there. He probably doesn't want is then the deputy leader who's not probably from Manchester to stand. So arguably, he'd probably want, the Manchester candidate, or at least someone from Manchester to stand there. If I had to guess, if Zach Polanski ever does eventually run for Parliament, it'll probably be in his own seat in London, one of his own areas in London, if I had to guess.
Yeah, probably he'll probably keep an eye out for a London by-election and see if any of that pops up. That's probably what he'll end up doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, as for but as a whole, I don't know who the candidates will be, and I don't think it will matter too much. I mean, it will make some difference, obviously, but not a huge amount. Feel. The thing that's kind of funny about Manchester Gorton is when it was first announced, there was a lot of speculation that it was going to be one of those really interesting races because of how many high profile people were going to run in it. You were going to have Andy Burnham from Labour, Zach Polanski from the Greens, Zaya Youssef for Reform, and George Galloway for the Workers' Party, all running in that seat, which would have put a load of media attention onto it. But ultimately, Burnham was blocked. Polanski turned down the offer to run. Galloway isn't running because Burnham isn't running, and Zaya Youssef has no interest in running either. So within 24 hours, a race that went from being very interesting has now transformed into a semi-interesting by-election.
If anything, it's just more another Labour scandal because of the political backfighting behind the scenes. If
Yeah,
anything.
it's basically that. It's turned from a high profile race to a race which is more focused on the future direction of the government, depending on how it ultimately plays out.
Yeah. So I'm just curious. Since Andy Burnham is blocked, does that mean that was his last chance to become possibly future leader? You think he's never going to get a chance again, or do you think something else might come down the line?
I think that my opinion is that it might change when Starmer goes and resigns as Prime Minister and leader of Labour. But at the moment, I would say that the only path for Burnham to become Labour leader or even just a Labour MP is new NEC elections. Like until there's new elections for the NEC, I really don't see a path forward for Burnham to get back into Parliament because decision to block him was basically unanimous. Like
Uh,
the only reason why it wasn't officially unanimous was because of Lucy Powell being on the NEC, and she was obviously not going to vote against Burnham, being a Greater Manchester MP herself that's massively lobbied for him to be back in Parliament. So it was effectively a unanimous decision against him. And when it's that decisive of a decision, it becomes very difficult to see how there is any path forward for Burnham when the NEC has made it abundantly clear that they will not allow him in under any circumstances.
Oh yeah, so arguably it could be, and not until the NEC elections, which will be, of course, I think around September time, if I recall, because that's usually when party conferences or something, right? Or am I?
Yeah,
So
it's round about that time when they
yeah,
change.
so
So
it's arguably, most people thought Starmer would be immediately forced to be booted out, or around, let's see, after locals, or even the summer. But could be that many MPs decide to wait a bit, wait for the NEC, and then do the whole vote of non-confidence and boot him out, just so they get a chance of at least bringing Andy Burnham back into Parliament. Though, granted, if not, there's always like wondering if Andy Burnham can't get back in, who does like sort of the left and soft left behind? Now, I've heard a few names, and let's see, some of them I think have a bit of baggage. Of course, we know that for the Labour right centrists, or whatever you want to call them, their candidate is, well, West Streeting, I believe. But for the left, it seems like or soft left, it's a bit more divided with like, let's see, I think Angela Rayner has been regarded as one, but of course there's the baggage with her, with like the scandal that got her to resign of the deputy leader. And Ed Miliband, because, well, both of them backed Burnham to be come in, but of course, Ed Miliband has already been leader before, and, well, he caused like the 2015 result, which was the election in which Labour lost Scotland, so he has that baggage. But who knows? Though I wouldn't be surprised if, let's see, the plan was to just get one of those two in and have them be Prime Minister a while, and then get Andy Burnham in, and then have him take over just before the next election. I could be wrong on that, but I don't know. What do you make of it? But as I take a look at these comments from Apollo D saying, wonder what the third parties run, example, Join EU, Homeland, UKIP, Communist Party, and wonder if Gina Miller tries. Oh yeah, that's another candidate. So I don't know. Do you want to go with the candidates first, or do you would like to talk about,
yeah,
let's see, the other parties?
I can go the candidates. I can go with the parties first because they are fairly easy to do. I think that there'll be a number of them that will run, but I don't think it will be too many. I think it will be similar to what Runcorn was like, where you'll have a few esoteric parties like the English Constitutional Party, maybe the English Democrats as well thrown in there. The more well known ones, but still obscure minor parties like UKIP, Volt will probably run. Those will run, but I don't think it will be like the Batley and Spen by-election in 2016, where it was just a who's who of extremist political parties. I don't think it will be like that. I just think it will be a handful of them from all sides of the spectrum. The party that might run that will be kind of interesting to see will be the Liberal Party, not the Liberal Democrats, but the Liberal Party.
They have a
The,
few councillors in Greater Manchester, right? Or is that
They do.
Liverpool?
They do Manchester. They have, or they used to. It was either Manchester or Liverpool. It's that area in general where the remnants of the old Liberal Party that refused to join with the Social Democratic Party Liberal Party merger still exist, and they have a couple of representatives on either Liverpool or Manchester City Council, and it'll be interesting to see if they run a candidate as well. And speaking of which, of a party that's kind of related to them, it'll be interesting to see if the SDP run a candidate as well. They won't make any difference to the race, but it will just be interesting to see if that bit of Manchester politics will be represented in a Manchester
Yeah,
by-election.
let's see.
So that's
Interesting.
my view on the parties. As for the candidates for future leader,
Yeah,
once
before you say that, Tom, one thing I'm commenting is no one's talking about your party standing a candidate, but then again, I think your party might be in too much of a mess to actually stand a candidate, which is a bit
I
embarrassing.
I don't think they'll run a candidate because the party is far too disorganized to come and together and run an election in an election of any kind. I mean, as far as I know, your party's not even running in this year's locals, so I
Which
don't see them running in a by-election, which is a much more complicated affair.
okay, but anyway, you were saying about let's see the candidates things.
For the candidates for the future, for the right wing of after Starmer goes, for the right wing of Labour, the candidate there is obvious. Wes Streeting, he will be the person they go for. There might be a couple of more that throw their hat in the ring to broaden the debate, but I expect that they'll probably drop out very quickly and rally behind Wes Streeting. People like Shabana Mahmood, and there's another one I've that's quite prominent that I can't think of. Maybe like Yvette Cooper, but probably not. So there'll be a handful of them that may show up initially to broaden the debate, but they'll all throw their support behind West Streeting.
And
For
arguing
me,
as a way to try and boost his like so saying, look, he has these people's support and all that. But yeah.
yeah, basically as a way of boosting his profile. Um, for the soft left in general, they are in a very bad spot because without Burnham, their successors are much, much weaker. Um, Angela Rayner is one, but the issue with her is she is scandal ridden because of what happened with the whole tax thing
Oh yeah.
in September of last year,
Oh yeah.
which which to my knowledge still hasn't been resolved.
Oh yeah, I
Um,
mean, if that wasn't the case, I'd argue she would probably have a very strong contending. Granted, she's still liked by the membership, but it's the larger public that's the problem.
Yeah, if that hadn't happened, then I think she would have been the favourite to go for it, especially now after Burnham's been blocked from entering Parliament. I think she would have been the very easy, clear successor to Starmer to rally behind for the soft left. But due to the scandal that she's involved in, it's a real struggle, to be honest, because she would win if she went for it because she is still popular with the membership. But I think that what would end up happening is you would be swapping one very unpopular leader for another slightly less unpopular leader because apparently the public were polled on Labour cabinet ministers and prominent Labour politicians, and it was found, and this actually surprised me quite a bit, that Andrew Rayner was the second most unpopular politician, Labour politician that the public are aware of. Which is a real surprise to me. I wasn't expecting that to be the
I
case.
I do remember my mum's ex-partner talking about how he disliked Angela Rayner, so I suppose I'm not entirely surprised, but yeah. Apologies, he says imagine Al Carnes and Thornberry might run,
Oh
which
yeah, they could both run as well. In addition to Mahmood, that's who I was thinking of. That Al Khan's guy,
okay.
he could run, and broaden the. All three of them could broaden the debate. Say that's what they're doing.
Mhm.
Stay in the race for a little while until the PLP starts picking people to go for, and then they drop out and all endorse Wes Streeting to basically boost his credentials.
All right.
But outside of Rayner, I mean, the only other person I can think of is Ed Miliband,
Oh yeah.
um,
And
which
unfortunately for him, well, maybe popular with members, at least more so than he ever was his time as leader, the fact that he was leader and lost, and like I said, he was the leader that, let's see, when they lost like Scotland for the first time, arguably isn't the best Ritzy picture.
yeah, the thing with Miliband is that Miliband did very badly in 2015. People have forgotten that election because everything that's happened since that election just completely drowns it out and it pales massively in comparison to everything that has happened in the 11 years since that election. But people don't really remember just how badly Miliband actually did in 2015. Like, I remember at the time, I wasn't massively politically active, but I was beginning to get involved in politics. And I remember at the time when I was researching the 2015 election when I was in school during my breaks, that everyone had the assumption that if Miliband wasn't going to outright win it, he was going to get at least the largest party. Like the polls for Labour and Conservative in that election were pretty much neck and neck. There were a couple of polls that showed the Tories ahead by 1 or 2 points, another poll that showed the Labour ahead by 1 or 2 points, but they were really, really close with each other. And basically, the assumption is that it would be a hung parliament with Labour as the largest party on about 270, 280 seats. And then they would go into the coalition with the Liberal Democrats, who would have about 40, 30 seats, and that would be enough to get Labour over the line. That did not happen in the end.
Oh yeah,
Instead,
cause
Labour got wiped out in Scotland comprehensively, lost every single seat apart from Ian Murray's. They did very badly in England, lost a lot of areas in the Midlands and the South, and the Liberal Democrats were also obliterated as well. They went from about 50 to 57 seats to a grand total of 8. So that election was seen as a really bad result. Like the political coverage of it at the time was kind of similar to what had happened with Corbyn's after 2019, but on a much lower scale.
uh,
I remember people in documentaries done after the fact basically said that they just couldn't believe just how badly Labour had done in that election,
uh,
and that while they knew they wouldn't win a majority, they at least thought that they could possibly get the largest party and go into
like
coalition with Lib Dems.
arguably, oh yeah, arguably the loss of Scotland really let's see screw them over because if they didn't lose it, arguably they would have done slightly better than what they did in 2010, but arguably it's still not that much, but it would have arguably they would have done better, but yeah, they completely lost Scotland, and the fact that they did that, people question would Labour ever get a majority again, regardless of who replaced Miliband afterwards, because there
Oh
was
yeah,
that discussion.
that was another discussion as well. Like there was basically discussions at the time up until 2024 whether Labour would ever win a majority again after
Yeah,
losing Scotland.
yeah,
The debate at the time was basically that Labour was never going to win a majority government ever again because Scotland was forever lost to the SNP. Now, the reality is that wasn't actually true if you looked at the electoral breakdown. Labour very much still could have gotten a majority even without Scotland, but the national discussion and debate at the time was that that was the end of any hope of Labour ever winning a majority again, and that they would forever be dependent upon the SNP or the Liberal Democrats if they were to ever hope to be in government again.
oh yeah, yeah,
So that was a very bad result for Labour in 2015.
oh yeah,
And so bringing back in the guy who led to that result um, isn't going to go down well with the public. Many people will see it as laughable and absolute desperation from Labour. It will be similar to what happened when Rishi Sunak brought David Cameron into the cabinet to be foreign secretary.
oh yeah,
Like people,
and
people at the time thought that was utterly laughable and desperate. It
uh,
would be even worse if Miliband was
I mean,
brought back in.
at least with David Cameron, he was a prime minister that won the Tories 2 elections and arguably their most stable leader during their 14 years of government. Ironically enough,
Well, the funny thing is that since 2015, that election, David Cameron is the only prime minister in the last decade to have served a full term in office.
oh yeah, and that wasn't even with a majority, which is
Yeah,
oh
that was only with a coalition government.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so yeah, I mean, it just wouldn't be a good idea to have Miliband in. It would be
oh
a
yeah,
really
no,
bad
I
idea to
mean.
do.
Arguably, he's the most forgettable leader Labour have had since the New Labour years, but but that doesn't mean that he's good. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, the soft left is in a real dilemma. They just don't really have any good candidates to choose from now that Burnham's been
yeah,
blocked. I
Uh,
think if I had to guess, they'll probably go with Angela Rayner just because there is no alternative for them.
that
So
is
they'll
true.
go for her because she's the only one they've got.
Yeah, I mean, for all we know, there could be a dark horse in the waiting. I mean, that what happened after the 2015 election, because Corbyn was no one thought he would become leader, and then it did. But that doesn't seem very likely, given the fact all the new and most of the new MPs on the soft left are probably newer guys and not much platform to rally behind other MPs. So, yeah, and I do wonder because I've sort of wondered if possible that the soft left would, pick someone, have it so get the NEC, get Burnham in, and just before the next election, have whoever they had stand down and put Burnham as the candidate to run as the next election. Could you see something like that happening at the very least? Or do you think they wouldn't do that because this would be like the third leader in a row or something?
Changing party leaders during an ongoing term is always a massive risk for the governing party and possibly even the opposition as well. Um, because a lot of the public can basically view it as incompetence and infighting and disunity within parliament. A lot of it's generally a 50-50 as to whether it succeeds or not. Sometimes it does, like what happened with Boris Johnson in 2019, where he took over after May resigned and then led the Tories to an 80-seat majority. It worked with John Major in the 1990s, where the Tories went from looking at completely wiped out under Thatcher to ending up winning a majority in the end, even if it was a small one. Um, and there was also Harold Macmillan taking over from Anthony Eden and winning an election then.
Oh yeah, it's
Um,
never
so
really.
there,
Sorry, go on.
so there are examples where it succeeds, but at the same time, there are also counter examples where it doesn't. Rishi Sunak taking over from Liz Truss led the Tories to their worst ever defeat.
Douglas Holmes,
Theresa,
is that
um, sorry,
it?
who did you say?
One against like Harold Wilson.
Oh yeah, Douglas Hume, that's another one as well. He failed in the end
And you said,
after he took over from Macmillan.
oh yeah,
And then there's also Theresa May as well herself. She took over from David Cameron after the referendum. She went for an election to try and get a massive majority, and she failed. She
yeah,
lost her majority.
yeah,
So it's a 50-50 gamble
oh yeah.
if you decide to do
And it
it.
doesn't help
But
that many of the examples you said that did work have all been Tories. It's never really happened with Labour when they've had to replace their prime minister. Arguably, when they've had to, it's usually when it's started to become a bit of a crisis for them.
Well, to
Which,
be fair, it would have worked with Gordon Brown if it hadn't been for 2008,
oh yeah,
because even when that was going on, when Brown took over, the year that he took over had quite a good honeymoon for him where he was ahead of the Tories in polling, but it all crumbled after 2008 happened. But either way, that's old history at that
oh
point.
yeah.
So, um,
Arguably, the best prime minister Labour's had in the 21st century just got screwed over by the timing.
yeah, very unfortunate timing for him. But with those examples, the key thing with all of them is that all of them that have succeeded have only been one leadership change. I cannot think of an example off the top of my head where there have been multiple leadership changes within a parliamentary term where that party that did that, that was in government, ended up winning the following election.
Not
Um,
even in Japan.
they're a different political culture to us. Not the same situation
Oh yeah.
here.
Oh yeah. I
Um,
mean, the only example we have is like
I mean, if you were talking
last
about
Scot.
international examples, I would have mentioned Japan, but that's a different story. That's
Anyway,
a different political culture and different political setup to us.
yeah.
Within our situation, I cannot think of any example where there have been multiple prime ministers from a single party who changing, and then that party ends up winning the election. It only ever happens once.
I
So I would say that if Labour is going to change their prime minister to replace Starmer, whoever takes over is the person who should see them to through to the next election. because I think if they get cold feet again and change their leader again, I think they will just lose. I
Oh
don't
yeah.
think at that point anything can
Uh,
save them.
yeah. To be yeah fair, because the last let's see Tory government Boris Johnson replaced. Unfortunately, the PLP and the membership foolishly chose Liz Truss, and she was a disaster. So bad that they had no choice but to replace her. But regardless of how bad or good Sunak could do as a job, he just could never really recover from Liz Truss. So
Yeah,
let's see.
the damage by that point was done. There
I
was
mean,
nothing that Sunak could do to
I mean,
rescue his party.
arguably, he probably minimized the damage as much as he could, though arguably probably should have waited until Farage actually went to the US to campaign for Trump and be too busy to come back here. But yeah, interesting. Apollo says Gordon Brown spent all of 2009 trying not to be ousted by the PLP. I think
Yeah,
among those,
that is true. Yeah,
yeah, Tom,
after the financial crisis happened, Labour was just in complete shambles
oh yeah,
because they were polling very, very badly, and it just didn't look like it was going to end well for them. So, yeah, but no, I think, in my opinion, if Labour does decide to remove Starmer and put in a new leader to replace him, that is the only lead time they should do it. Whoever they go with, whether it's Rayner, Streeting, somehow Burnham in an alternate reality or some magical thing that we don't know of happens, or Al Khan's or whoever it is, that should be their candidate to lead them into the next general election. If they change again, if, for example, Streeting takes over, the same things happening now, terrible polling, disastrous local elections, one by-election defeat after the other. If they decide to do that, if that happens and they decide, Wes, you gotta go, we're just as screwed under you as we are under Starmer, then and they follow through on that and they get rid of Streeting and they put in somebody else, even if it's Burnham, I don't think it will save them at that point. I think that the public will just see them as the Tory government, the last Tory government, but red, and vote them out. So,
oh,
in my opinion, whoever they go with after Starmer should be their candidate to lead them into the next election, no matter who it is.
okay, so anyway, Polity seems to agree with you, saying for sure, 3 leaders in one term is too many. Only allowed one change, yeah, which arguably Labour probably wouldn't want to do this until maybe like a second term of government. But Starmer's been so bad that they're not going. It's like made it like impossible for that to happen. So yeah, so arguably among like the candidates, arguably if Starmer stays on, he'd be the worst option because he's just that hated at this point.
Oh, I mean, the thing is, from the Labour Party's perspective, Starmer can't be the Prime Minister going into the next election because if he is, they will just be wiped out.
Yeah,
They'll do as badly as they did in 1931 if he
it's oh
stayed
yeah.
on.
Oh yeah. The only question in which, if that does happen, I never want to hear 1939, 1935 from Labour right or Starmer right ever again. But yeah, but so among the other options, we've got at the moment it looks like either Angela Rayner, let's see, West Streeting, maybe Ed Miliband. Let's see, who do you think would do the least worst amongst those three?
In terms of what exactly, like policy or elections or leadership election, what
I would say
specifically?
leader. I'd say if they were the MP to PM to run the general election when that happens.
Oh, that's really difficult to answer because all three of them have major, major weaknesses. Rayner is scandal ridden. Miliband was the last, was an old leader who did very badly in election, and Streeting has a lot of the same criticisms of him that apply to Starmer as well. Although the one key advantage that he has over Starmer is that he has charisma and he has a personality which will make people not despise him as much as they do Starmer, maybe. So, out of all of them, I think I'd probably have to say Streeting. I think he, out of the three, would probably do the best election wise.
Oh yeah.
Um, just being from an objective point of view, I think he would do the best in a general election if he was their candidate out of those three. I think that Rayner is just too scandal ridden, and I think the public have an inherent bias against her that I don't think she'll be able to overcome no matter what. And the right wing media, especially by journalists like Dan Hodges that despise Rayner with a passion, would lead a complete crusade against her to undermine her and make her as unpopular as possible. Um, Miliband again, he would the same problems that you had when he was leader last time would just come up again. So I think out of all of them, Streeting would probably do the best in a general election.
That's a bit of a shame because let's see. The only positive thing I can say about Streeting is that he'd be the first gay prime minister, if I recall correctly, right?
First
He's gay.
LGBT prime minister, yeah, he would
Yeah,
be
yeah,
if he became PM.
yeah. Which, yeah, fair enough. Which arguably maybe not be the first female prime minister for Labour, but at the very least they can do that claim if you want to do political correctness. But I think most people don't care about that anymore after Liz Truss, Theresa May, and Rishi Sunak. But
I mean, in many ways, that is kind of an interesting thing about Britain and its political representation. Um, is that despite Britain being, compared to the US, being a much less diverse place in all areas, the political leadership of Britain has been significantly more diverse than it has been in the US. The all leaders of America have all been straight white men,
yeah,
whereas in Britain, we've had women prime ministers, two of them, no, three of them. We've had one ethnic minority prime minister. We possibly could have an LGBT prime minister. So it's kind of interesting in a way how, despite being a less diverse place compared to the US, the political representation of British leadership has been much more diverse than it has been in America. And also, as well, public acceptance of that has also been much greater in Britain than it has been in America. Like when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, nobody cared about his background outside of his class background. Nobody really cared that he was the first ethnic minority prime minister, whereas Obama in the US was a massive deal. And the same thing would happen with Wes Streeting. Nobody would care. If he becomes prime minister, nobody would care about the fact that he's a member of the LGBT community.
oh
People
yeah,
would just accept it for what it is.
oh yeah. If it
So I
was
think
like in,
I think that's an interesting difference in political culture between Britain and the US. How, despite being a much more diverse place, the political leadership of the US is not representative of what the country is like, whereas Britain has much more diverse political leadership relative to its makeup, and the public reaction to that is much different in Britain than it is in the US. Just an
arguably,
interesting, just an interesting observation of
oh yeah,
mine.
arguably it's probably due to US's more history and also half the country being well, whatever voted Trump, I guess. But yeah, so that's probably a thing. Apollo TD's asked a question: what do you guys think would probably better with the general public, Rayner or Wesley? Which I think
I
you,
already answered that with
yeah,
Wes.
yeah. See, no, no,
I mean, it pains me to say it because I do not like him at all, and I think he would be a bad prime minister. But objectively speaking, from a political analyst point of view, Wes Streeting would do better than Rayner, in my
yeah.
opinion.
Let's see. So yeah, which would make it very hard. Let's see. Regardless, would make me still very hard to actually vote for him since I'm still technically a member of Labour. Let's see. So arguably, I'd rather have Andy Burnham as that's the only enthusiastic one I can think of. But yeah, let's see. At the very least, whether or not he does well, let's see. Even if he does well, there's still a debate whether or not he'd let's see do better than I guess you could say whether or not he would get 200, let's see, 300, or even, let's see, 100. I doubt he would get double digit seats, but arguably, let's say it depends if could he prevent, like, what's he, a wipeout like 2024 for the Tories, or would he get something more similar to what happened with Corbyn in 2019? But yeah, and
I mean, that's just a question that's too hard to answer. I mean, I can't even answer that because I have a guess as to how he would govern, but I really honestly don't know.
oh
I
yeah,
think I think he wouldn't be a total political dunce, a total moron like Starmer has
oh yeah,
been, where he just does not know how on earth to govern a country no matter what,
oh
and
yeah,
he does not know how to do the most bare basic of politics. I think Wes Streeting would be smart enough to realise that whilst he is a Blairite through and through, I think he realises that Labour is a politically diverse coalition made up of multiple different factions, and I think at the bare minimum, he will be willing to throw red meat to those factions to keep him on side so they don't try and undermine him or try and remove him as leader, unlike Starmer, who's just totally oblivious to these
uh,
facts at all and has ruined his premiership as a result of that fact. So,
base.
but either way, it is hard to predict. So I can't make a prediction as to how well exactly he would do in an election. I just know based on all the facts that he would do better than Rayner and especially Miliband.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Let's see. Apology to you. Imagine Rain being a wartime PM disaster. Arguably, yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it's
well, that
but
is true. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah. But arguably, I suppose one thing that West Streeting probably at the very least is probably like arguably he'd probably be try to be like an early Blair PM where Blair would at least do stuff like the minimum wage. Policies everyone would support. Of course, Blair got a bit too much of an ego in his head and then caused Iraq, and that basically killed him off and made basically everyone no longer tolerate him. But arguably, I think Streeting would probably be smart enough to realize not to do that at the very least. But yeah. Oh, and
I don't think. I think beyond the usual stuff, I don't think Streeting would go into a war of aggression like what Blair did. I think if Streeting was to get involved in a conflict beyond just the typical US NATO commitments, it would only be a defensive war. Like, if the worst comes to pass and Russia decides to invade a Baltic country, that would be an example of him being a wartime prime minister. It wouldn't be he does Iraq or something like that. I don't think he would do something like that. I think if he ends up being a wartime prime minister, it will be a purely defensive wartime prime minister, not an offensive one. But that's
yeah.
just my opinion anyway.
Yeah, because that's never worked out for Labour. But yeah, anyway, Apollo TD says people say slavery was an issue with Obama being hyped up, but Sonic being Indian meant his ancestors were subjected of the British Empire until the late 1940s. Arguably, yes. I mean, we kind of screwed India up pretty badly for centuries, if I recall.
Well, India's situation was really a complex one because while we didn't really help the situation, there was also a case where there wasn't much we could do because what the people on the ground wanted were complicated and not what we really wanted. Our solution to India post independence was basically united India, where essentially the British Raj would become its own independent country. The borders that were created would be the ones that would be internationally recognized. So basically, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh would all be one unified country. That was our ideal solution, but the only people that were in favour of a united India were Pakistani socialists and communists. Everybody else didn't want that. They wanted the two-state solution, or the two nations theory, as it was officially called. Um, Indian nationalists like Gandhi wanted an independent Indian state that was separate and majority Hindu, and the Pakistani conservatives and nationalists wanted an independent Muslim state of their own, and ultimately that's what we created. But the way it was created was really haphazard, not well thought out, and essentially just shoved upon the people without warning. So when mass migration of the two peoples began, it was pure chaos.
Oh, yeah,
And
basically,
it also didn't help as well that you had these widow independent states that were created, um, these former princely states that didn't want to be a part of either India or Pakistan, but then got taken over anyway, like Hyderabad, Sikkim, and Kashmir were the examples that were created. Eventually, Hyderabad got taken over by India because India didn't want a massive princely state right in the middle of its country. Sikkim was allowed to be independent until the 1960s, but it was a puppet state of India, and then India eventually subsumed it into the country. And Kashmir remains an internationally disputed territory to this very day, which has caused multiple wars between India and Pakistan. So it was more of a complicated situation, really. We didn't help, but at the same time, our hands were tied because we couldn't impose any solution upon India. We were not in a position to do that at all. But
ah,
at the same time, the solution that was wanted by the people on the ground was never going to make everybody happy.
fair enough. No, granted, I suppose India. You could also use the India-Pakistan situation as why you see most countries in the world don't necessarily trust Britain with foreign policy. But yeah, but uh,
Partitions, generally speaking, never end well, to be
yeah,
honest.
yeah,
There are some examples where they do, like Czech Republic and Slovakia. That was a partition which ended well. But generally speaking, most partitions end in disaster because the issue with partitions is people, generally speaking, are not neatly organized along ethnic lines within countries. And that is especially true in a very ethnically diverse country like India, where it wasn't so clear as to be this Muslim state, everyone is Muslim, this Hindu state, everyone is Hindu. There was a real mix within both of them, where Pakistan was majority Muslim, but there was a huge Hindu community within it, and India was majority Hindu, but with a large Muslim community within it as well. So so partition for doing that was always going to end in disaster because people again are not divided along easily definable ethnic lines, and
okay,
that's why they often end in chaos.
fair enough. Fair enough.
But
Anyway,
that's a historical discussion. Back to the sort of Burnham thing,
yeah,
and to sort of wrap it up because I think we're getting to the point where most of the conversation is exhausted. The final point I wanted to make about Burnham is I think the Shadow Cabinet has actually played this whole situation as best as they possibly could. Because what I noticed about the Shadow Cabinet when Andrew Gwynn resigned and the by-election was going up is each of them distance themselves successfully from what was going on. So Wes Streeting came out and criticised anonymous briefings done against Burnham and said that they shouldn't be done and the party should be united, focusing on going after reform and doing good work within government. Shabana Mahmood said that she respected Andy Burnham on Laura Kuenssberg's show and said that he, if the party agreed, should be given the opportunity to run. And Lucy Powell as well, and many others did. All what was noteworthy is how everybody in the shadow cabinet made clear their position, and their position was one of political pluralism and allowing broad debate within the party. And the reason I find that noteworthy is because it basically showed that the cabinet wanted to make clear to Labour members, especially, but also to the wider public, that none of what happened with Burnham is their fault.
oh, yeah.
So basically, the goal of the shadow cabinet, and I think they did this quite successfully, is pin all of the blame for what happened with Burnham onto Starmer. So the membership would direct all of their anger to Starmer and not onto them,
Oh
which
yeah.
would have meant that come a leadership election, whenever the topic of Burnham comes up, they can wash their hands of it and say, I supported him, I wanted him to be the candidate, I wanted him to be in the party, but Starmer blocked him, so it's his fault.
Oh yeah, and if somehow Burnham does get in, they get a chance of like joining the possibly getting to join his cabinet or something. But yeah,
Yeah, that's another angle as well that they were going for, making sure that when if somehow Burnham got in and he formed a cabinet, they would increase their chances of ending up in the cabinet. So
yeah.
I think the shadow cabinet played a blinder here, really, and has managed to make the very best out of a bad situation and pin all of the blame on number 10 and Morgan McSweeney and Keir
Oh yeah,
Starmer in particular.
yeah.
So as a result, they are able to distance themselves from this and not get any pushback from the members, which damages potential leadership campaigns moving forward. It was very smartly done. And I
Oh yeah.
think it was probably done because the Shadow Cabinet knew what was going to happen. They knew that Burnham was going to be blocked. So they wanted to make sure that they were not blamed for that happening.
Oh yeah, it's like you can deal with this Starmer. So yeah, and Apollo TD says the perfect comment of Burnham is blocked purely at the door, Starmer and McSweeney. So yeah,
Yeah.
arguably the cabinet have managed to save themselves at the very least, regardless of this disaster. But either way, one way or another, Starmer's days are numbered no matter what he did here. But he might have just more of just earned the wrath of more left wing members and generally voters in general that wanted Andy Burnham. But yeah,
I
anyway,
think that the reality is that after the Gorton by-election ends, almost certainly with Labour's defeat, Labour and Starmer in particular are going to be facing a massive civil war within the Labour Party afterwards. Because as soon as the result comes in that it's a Green or Reform gain, every single pro Burnham Labour MP is going to come out and say this would not have happened if Andy Burnham was the candidate. The reason we lost Gorton was because of pure factionalism and number 10 putting faction before country, and you just have a massive disaster months out from a local elections happening.
oh yeah, especially from the defeat. And apologies, say 80 MPs sign this private letter to number 10 backing Burnham. There'll be backbenchers only, surely. So junior ministers and cabinet ministers could be another 50, so maybe 130. But regardless, yeah, there's going to be infighting. But I think it's time that Streeton will be hoping for a reform game, hard left PLP hoping for a green gain. That's fair. I could see maybe something like that,
Yeah, I
but
could
yeah.
as well.
But anyway, speaking of reform, I think it's time we get to the other topic, which meant to be 30 minutes of this Burnham's discussion, but ended up being an hour and 17 minutes. But that's fair. It just got that interesting.
Yeah, well,
We've got,
we'll only make this brief then, because there isn't too much to say here, but only
yeah,
about 5 or 10 minutes. I think we work on this.
yeah, maybe 15 at most. But yeah,
Yeah.
Suella Braverman, after long speculation, has finally defected to, well, basically Nigel Farage's reform, which many people thought this would have happened much, much sooner, I will admit. But for one reason or another, this didn't happen. So yeah,
Yeah, I was expecting this to happen like such a long time ago. Like I remember back in 2024 I said something along the lines of by the end of the year she'll be in reform. So the fact that it took her 2 years almost to end up in reform is the biggest surprise of this all. But
yeah,
Slower Braverman joining reform, not at all surprising. It
yeah.
is the political party for her. It's a similar situation with Rosendale or Rosendal, whichever one of those two. Like Reform is the party for those two, especially Rosendal himself, because he was Reform before Reform was even a concept.
Oh yeah.
Um, but it's just incredible, really, what Reform is doing here, because Reform positions themselves as an anti establishment right wing populist party that's going against the Labour Tory Uni Party, as they call it. And they're essentially becoming Tory rebrand.
Oh yeah,
They're
the Tory
essentially,
dumping ground, basically.
yeah, the Tory dumping ground, like failed Boris Trust Tories going to reform because they know that they've got no chance of winning in the Tories, so they go over there and hope that that will succeed
Yeah,
somehow.
basically becoming the Lib Dems in 2019 under Joe Swinson, with all these centrist Ramonas from like Change UK or the Tory Party, or let's see.
Or
So yeah,
even Labour as well, back then as
yeah,
well. So
yeah.
yeah,
It's like
it's
gone.
I was gonna say I don't know how you can portray yourself as an anti-establishment party when you are literally bringing in not only people from the previous government but people from the previous cabinet into your party as well, and have even made some of them shadow cabinet ministers within that party as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, let's see. So, but yeah, I do recall, like, I do know, I have heard her husband joined a few months before she did, but yeah, but I think the only really newsworthy thing of this is like the latest of defections that's happened recently. I mean, okay, you got like Lee Anderson was like the first MP ever, and but that was before the general election, so most people don't count that one, to be honest.
We Anderson, the best way I would describe Lee Anderson is it's not an exact comparison, but he is basically the right wing version of George Galloway. Like, he has been a part of so many parties that it's just an actual joke. He was Labour, then he was Tory, and now he's Reform. Like, the only parties he's got left to go in before he completes the checklist is the Lib Dems and the Greens.
Which there's no way they would ever let him in. But
No.
no, let's see. But yeah, that was the only real defector. Then I think about a year ago, you had what's her name, Nadine Dorris, which arguably is the Tory equivalent of Diana Abbott for most people.
Oh, Nadine Dorries, basically Boris's best friend forever.
Oh
Like, yeah, yeah, her joining was very much.
yeah,
I mean, when that happened, I think that was the first example of when people were like, "Hang on a minute, what's going on here? I thought you were meant to be a different party from the Tories. Why are you bringing in the Dean Dorries and all these failed Boris Tories into your party?"
I
But
yeah,
at this
but
point, it's just been so many of them, like Nadine Dorries, Jonathan Gullis, Robert Jemrick, Suella Braverman now, Rosendahl. Like, it is pretty much just the dumping ground of the Tories, like of failed Tories from the Boris era.
oh yeah, I mean, arguably that maybe people could have ignored Nadine Dorris, but now you've got like a bunch more MPs. People are starting to talk about this, and whether or not like is this just now going to be another Tory party and all that stuff. I mean, granted, well, admit, the only one I would say maybe surprising was maybe Robert Jenrick, but mostly because many people thought he would try and take out I forgot Dawn Butler for leader and all that stuff. Though, granted, Dawn Butler's
Not Dawn Butler, Kemi Badenoch,
Get
not
me
Dawn
back,
Butler.
not so. I got the names mixed up. Sorry, sorry. But I guess that just shows how forgettable Kenny Baggernot really is as like, let's see, the Tories' fourth female leader and first a black leader, if you will. But but yeah,
Yeah, I mean, Jenrick only left because he was kicked out. Like, he was basically hoping this year, after the locals were a complete disaster for the Tories under Kemi Badenoch, that he would trigger a leadership election and then become Tory leader. When Badenoch began to experience a poll boost after that awful budget that Rachel Reeves did at the end of last year, Jemrick's leadership ambitions went up in flames, and so as a result, he began to have conversations from December onwards with Nigel Farage about defecting to reform and doing it in the most damaging way possible. But
yeah, possibly
unfortunately
think.
for him, he got caught and got kicked out and then joined reform anyway.
Oh yeah, let's see now whether or not let's see what Robert Jenrick is thinking long term. Perhaps he's thinking he could perhaps at some point replace Farage when his time is done in reform. But then again, I doubt reform would last much without Farage. But we'll have to wait and see on that. But yeah,
Yeah, I
but
mean, to be honest, I struggle to see where Jenrick goes moving forward, given that he wanted desperately to be Tory leader and now he can't be. I guess his assumption is, well, once Farage goes, I'll take over Reform and be leader of that. But the problem that Reform has is the same problem that every Farage party has had, where without Farage, the party dissolves,
Oh yeah.
essentially. So.
And arguably, yeah, you got a bunch of big names joining the party now, but they're all infamous Tories.
Yeah,
And
like then nobody's going to vote for a party filled with the guys that they just voted out last time.
uh,
Like Farage is the only thing that's really keeping this all together at this point.
yeah, arguably, I think for lucky for Farage, Starmer is just that freaking terrible that people are ignoring. Let's see, these Tory defections for the most part. And say like, okay, I'm still voting Farage because I hate Starmer. I think that is basically what most people are thinking right now.
Well, it's
But yeah,
basically because Starmer is Reform's biggest recruiter. Like, I've said this many times before, but so long as he remains leader of Labour and Prime Minister, Reform has got nothing to worry about because
oh
he's
yeah,
so bad that he will just keep that party constantly hovering around 33% uninterrupted, apart from YouGov polls, because of how bad of a leader he is.
yeah, and Party D seems to agree with us, saying, yeah, Reform needs young, popular talent that aren't ex-Tory MPs or councillors. Imagine they could get a couple next Parliament. Who knows? But arguably, yeah, basically, Farage is being kept because of Starmer, which arguably is probably one of the biggest downfalls with Burnham. Not Burnham not getting in, because if he did get in and he did become leader, arguably this would give a bit of a popularity boost with Labour, not only just in Greater Manchester, but maybe among some Lib Dem and Green defectors, if you will, in terms of their voters. They could come back, but it could also, with Burnham, they could then people really start to question Farage as like, wait, do we really want a Farage with all these ex cruddy Tories as our next PM and all that stuff? Now, arguably, perhaps if West Streeting possibly takes over, he could do possibly this. He could possibly change that argument to that more focused on Farage and these defections. But right now, it ain't being. See, the wider public is not talking about it. You got the journalists and even some MPs talking about this damaging Farage, but until Starmer goes, you're not going to have that sort of discussion being taken serious by the public, at least from what I can tell. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so, but yeah, overall, there isn't too much to really say about the specific defection or defections in general. It's just Reform is lucky that they have got the most unpopular government and prime minister ever as their opposition because it allows them to get away with things like this without much scrutiny.
Oh yeah.
Um, but that is a dangerous strategy to go on because, well, it's very unlikely that Starmer remains Prime Minister by the end of the year, and he will likely step down after the terrible locals that are coming up later on in the year. So it's a dangerous strategy for Reform to focus on if they want to win, but that's what they seemingly are doing. So,
Oh
yeah.
yeah. And who knows? It's possible the one way Streeting does become leader, one way he could turn it to his advantage is pointing out these ritzy Tory defections and all that, which arguably, due to the fact that they got a lot of Tory defections, there was some talk about whether or not there'd be a Labour defection, but I don't think any Labour MP, no matter how right wing they are, would want to be associated with MPs from Boris's government.
The only people who are current MPs who I could have seen going over to reform, but even then I think it's unlikely, are John Hinder, Mike Tapp, and David Taylor. Those are the only ones who would have gone over. Although, to be fair, the only reason I say David Taylor is because David Taylor seems to spend half his time moaning at Jeremy Corbyn and how awful he is. And the other half of his time is moaning at the causes that Jeremy Corbyn supports and how awful they are.
That's the Hemel
Um,
Hempstead MP, right?
yeah, that's him.
Uh,
He was the Hemel Hempstead
I
MP.
I am so glad I do not live in Hemel Hempstead and it comes to Hertfordshire.
Yeah, yeah, he's a bit of a joke, to be honest.
Yeah.
Mike Tapp, the reason for him is because he's like really hard on like immigration and is a massive Starmer loyalist. But John Hinder's a bit of a different one. I think out of all of the Labour intake, he is the one that's probably the most likely to defect, but I don't think he'll defect anytime soon. He's loyal to Labour, but not as hardcore of a loyalist as Taylor and Tapp are. I think the only thing that could get him to leave, if he was to leave, would be if a new leader comes in and they're much more socially liberal on immigration. I think if that happened and they rolled back all of Shabana Mahmood's immigration reforms, I think Hinder would probably leave Labour and go join Reform.
Uh,
But that's a while off. But outside of those three, I don't see anybody else leaving Labour to go to Reform.
so that last one you mentioned is basically a blue Labour type of politician.
Yeah, pretty much. Blue
Yeah.
Labour type politician.
Yeah.
That's what he is like.
So yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Kate Hoey was also another one, and I think she's the one that they were going to hope to trigger last week, but that ultimately went nowhere in the end. And to be
yeah.
honest, she wasn't Labour. She was basically a DUP MP in England, so that doesn't really count.
Yeah, she just got the seat at just the right time for her because otherwise none of the Labour members would, or at least I think at the time, would have had her as their MP. Which, and
No.
let's see, but yeah, but arguably, but yeah. So frankly, it's no surprising this defection has happened. Arguably, this would be something a bit more scrutinized by those who say, like, I thought you're supposed to be different from the Tories, but it isn't because, well, Starmer's currently in charge. But once Starmer is gone, this will probably be looked in. Now, whether or not that actually stops Nigel Farage actually winning a general election, it probably might not. But at the very least, it might be something that prevents him from getting a majority. But we'll have to. But this is like hard to tell. I mean, there's too many unknowns. But yeah, it's just something that probably should have just happened a year or two ago, to be honest. But it isn't. So I think that just about more or less covers everything we can say about this topic, really. I won't admit, I thought it would be a bit more balanced topic, but the Andy Burnham stuff was a lot more interesting. So but yeah, so
Yeah, so yeah, that's mostly all the topics we wanted to talk about, really, and we covered them as best we can. But yeah,
yeah,
the sum up conclusion I would basically say is Burnham was blocked because of factionalism. This will severely damage Labour and Starmer's credibility, authority, and government. The Manchester Gorton by election will almost certainly result in a Labour defeat and a Green or Reform gain. A Labour civil war will happen, which will only make Labour's precarious position in the locals even worse. And ultimately, it's not going to be a fun time for the Labour Party in the coming months.
mm-hmm.
And the situation is just going to get interesting, but not great.
Yes,
So, yeah, that's
yeah.
pretty much it.
Yeah. So and it's the gift that keeps on giving for Farage. So anyway, thank you, Tom, for doing this. I wasn't sure whether or not I would do this. It came to me a bit earlier, I guess, during the day. But yeah, let's see, who knows? It depends. I guess it depends whether or not we keep doing this down the line. I think it depends on whether how long Swiss comes back or not. But it's not like we're gonna try and do this every week. I figured, you know what? This is like biggest thing in UK for a while. Might as well see what happens down the line, though. Granted, Swiss will probably be back once he's ready to do his milkies and arguably the local elections. But yeah, that's all I have to say for now. Thank you, Apollo TD, for all your comments. At least we got one viewer there. But yeah. And thanks again, Tom, and for everyone else. If you've seen this, I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and see you next time if it happens again, or let's see, or maybe who knows. Let's see. But for now, bye.
Goodbye.